My house smells like cedar and lemon polish, especially in the living room, where the walls are lined with wood paneling that I installed myself almost 40 years ago. I wipe them down with a damp cloth every morning and apply polish once a month. Virginia always said I was obsessed with cleanliness, but at 65, a man needs something to hold on to. For me, it's the house we built together. Healdsburg is a small town of only 6,000 people. When Virginia and I moved here in 1982, there weren't even 4,000. We bought a lot on the outskirts, near a pine forest. I had just been promoted to superintendent in the Internal Revenue Service, and Virginia worked as an accountant for a local construction company. We were young, energetic, and full of plans. We built the house gradually. First, the main part, the living room, kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom. Then when Elliot was born, we added another bedroom and a study. The porch I added for our 20th anniversary. The last addition on the east side was a workshop for me and a needlework room for Virginia. Every corner of this house holds memories. Elliot's height markings on the kitchen door jamb, scuff marks on the floor by the fireplace where we loved to sit on winter evenings, the scratch on the dining room table from the day Virginia threw her fork in frustration after learning of my stupid affair with a coworker, a singular and shameful mistake for which I still can't forgive myself. Virginia passed away 5 years ago, pancreatic cancer. It took only 4 months from diagnosis to funeral, rapid, relentless, like a hurricane sweeping away everything in its path. For the first year after she died, I was on autopilot. I got up, ate breakfast, looked out the window, ate lunch, looked out the window again, ate dinner, and went to bed. Sometimes I would talk to her as if she was still there. Every night I wished her good night. Elliot came over often then, checking on me, bringing groceries, sometimes staying for the weekend. Back then, I still thought we had a good relationship, that my son was an extension of Virginia and me, of our love, of our values. How wrong I was. The first change began when Elliot met Raven. Tall, slender, with brown hair and a keen eye, she worked as a realtor in a real estate agency. They met when Elliot was looking for a new apartment closer to his office. 3 months later, he brought her to meet me. Dad, this is Raven Settle. Raven, this is my father, Noam Chandler. Raven smiled, extending her hand for a shake. Her nails were long, covered in dark red polish, and her handshake was firm, almost masculine. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Chandler. Elliot has told me so much about you. Likewise, I replied, though Elliot had told me almost nothing about her. At dinner, Raven talked mostly about real estate, about the hot market, and how important it was not to miss the moment to make a good investment. You have a beautiful home, Mr. Chandler, she said, looking around. It's so cozy. How much square footage is there? 220, I answered, plus a 15-square-foot lot. How long have you lived here? My wife and I moved here in '82. Oh, so more than 40 years. Her eyes widened slightly. And how often did you make repairs? Old houses like this need constant attention, right? I keep the house in good condition, I answered dryly. The last major renovation was 5 years ago, after Virginia died. Sure, she said quickly, glancing at Elliot. I'm just saying it's a huge responsibility to keep a house like this by yourself, especially at your age. I almost choked on my mashed potatoes. My age? I questioned. I'm 65, not 95. I'm doing just fine. Dad, that's not what Raven meant, Elliot interjected. It's just such a big house for one person. It was just fine for your mom and me, I said. For me, too. Dinner ended in tense silence. As they drove away, Elliot put his arm around me and whispered, You could be nicer to her. She's trying. Trying to what? I asked. To appraise my house? Elliot just shook his head and got in the car. 6 months later, they were married. The wedding was modest in Healdsburg City Park. Elliot asked me not to invite my old friends and colleagues, so as not to create a crowd. As a result, it was just me on the groom's side and the bride's parents, brother, and a dozen realtor girlfriends on the bride's side. I felt like a stranger at my own son's party. After the wedding, their visits became less frequent, once a month than every other month. Elliot always made excuses. Work, fatigue, weekend plans. When they did come, the conversation invariably turned to the subject of my house. Dad, have you thought about moving to a smaller apartment? Elliot asked during one of these visits. Something on the first floor, no stairs, with a concierge and security. Why? I wondered. I like my house, but it's so much work, Raven sighed. Cleaning, repairing, gardening. What if you fall down or get sick? Who's going to help? I have neighbors, and I'm not going to fall. Sidorinom, Raven was calling me by my name now, even though I didn't ask her to. You have to think about the future, your safety and your comfort. Thank you for your concern, but I am in a position to decide what is comfortable for me. Dad, don't be stubborn, Elliot said. Raven and I are just worried about you. If you were really worried, you'd come more often than every 2 months, I remarked. Elliot flared up. You know I have a lot of work to do, and Raven and I are planning on having kids. We need to prepare financially. Of course I understand, I said, though I didn't really understand why preparing for children would prevent me from visiting my father. That evening they left earlier than usual. I stood on the porch, staring after their car, and felt the growing gap between me and my son, between our worlds and values. The visits grew shorter and tenser. Each time the subject of selling the house came up again and again like a stubborn floater. Sometimes Raven would bring brochures about retirement, condominiums, or lists of apartments she thought would be perfect for someone in my position. Look, Noam, she'd say, spreading the glossy brochures out on my dining room table. There's a pool, a gym, a communal lounge for meetings. You'll be able to socialize with people your own age. People my age? I questioned. You mean old people who do nothing but talk about their illnesses and watch TV? No, thank you. Dad, you're being unfair, Elliot interjected. A lot of old people are active. Exactly, Raven chimed in. And think how much you could get for this house. The neighborhood's become very popular, with its great infrastructure and proximity to the woods. I could sell it for at least $700,000. After the condo, you'd have enough money left over to... For what? I interrupted. To sit on a deposit and wait for me to die? Gnome! Raven was outraged. How can you say that? Elliot and I care about your future. I looked at them and all I saw was greed. Raven's eyes were calculating. Elliot's were impatient. My son had changed. Or maybe he'd always been this way, and I just didn't want to notice. In March of this year, they arrived unannounced. I was working in the garden, trimming lilac bushes when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Wiping my hands on my jeans, I went to greet the unexpected guests. Hi, Dad. Elliot looked tense. We thought we'd stop by and check on you. It's unexpected, but nice, I said, though I had a feeling it wouldn't be a pleasant visit. Inside the house, Raven started looking around, as if assessing the property. Gnome, how long ago did you replace the roof? She asked, looking up at the ceiling. I think I see signs of a leak. 3 years ago, I replied. And there are no leaks. And the wiring? These old houses often have electrical problems. I had the wiring done 10 years ago. It's perfectly fine. Raven looked at Elliot. He nodded as if they had discussed the scenario in advance. Dad, Elliot began, Raven and I have been thinking a lot about your situation, about how hard it is for you to be alone in this big house. And we've decided that the smartest thing to do would be to sell the house and move into a nursing home? I interrupted. We've already discussed this. The answer is no. Not a nursing home, Raven objected. To a modern complex for the elderly, there's medical staff, organized recreational activities. I don't need organized recreation. I cut her off. I have my own interests. Gardening, fishing, chess club on Thursdays. Dad, be reasonable. Elliot raised his voice. You're 65 years old. How much longer can you keep the garden and the house going? Sooner or later, you're going to need help. When that happens, I'll hire an assistant, I replied, with my money, which I earned in 35 years in the tax office. But that's unsustainable, Raven exclaimed. Why spend money on assistants when you can live in a place where everything is included? I looked at both of them. Elliot's forehead was dripping with sweat, and Raven was fidgeting nervously with the strap of her expensive watch. Tell me honestly, I asked, do you need the money from the sale of the house? What? Elliot gave me a look of outrage. How can you think that? We care about you. If you need money, I can help you, I continued. But the house is not for sale. Raven stood up. Gnome, we can see that you're not ready for a constructive conversation. We'll come another time when you're in a better mood. They left, leaving me with mixed feelings. On the one hand, I was glad I had defended my position. On the other, I was gnawing with anxiety. Something in their behavior seemed insincere, as if they weren't telling me everything. This was confirmed 2 weeks later. I was tinkering in the garage when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Looking out the window, I saw Elliot's car. He and Raven got out and headed toward the house. I wanted to step out to meet them, but something stopped me. Maybe it was intuition, developed over the years as a tax inspector, where I'd seen a lot of crooks and liars. They entered the house without knowing I was in the garage. Through the connecting door, I could hear them talking in the kitchen. "The old man's out of his mind," Raven said. "Stubborn as a donkey. Is it so hard to realize that at his age it's time to move to a place where he'll be taken care of?" "He's always been stubborn," Elliot said. "But it's gotten worse lately. Have you noticed how he forgets things? Last time he couldn't remember his roommate's name. Jack? He's known him for 40 years. Exactly. I also noticed the bills on the table. Some of them were overdue. I froze. What are they saying? I'd never forgotten the name Jack Owens, and I'd paid all my bills on time through online banking." "That's good," Raven said. "That's something we can use. If we can prove he's losing his memory and failing financially, the court can appoint you guardian. And then we can sell the house without his consent?" Elliot sounded hopeful. "Exactly, and solve our, problems. 700,000 will solve everything," Elliot laughed nervously. "Even if part of it goes to a room in a nursing home for my father." "Not a nursing home, honey," Raven corrected. "In a senior citizen complex." "That sounds better," they laughed. I stood slumped against the wall, not believing my ears. My own son and his wife were planning to declare me incapacitated so they could take possession of my house. The house I built with my own hands, the one I lived in with Virginia all our lives together. "And if he resisted," Elliot asked, "what could he do?" Raven snorted. "We'll find a doctor who will confirm the initial stage of dementia. I know a psychiatrist who is willing to sign the necessary papers for a certain amount of money. And the neighbors? They've known him for years. Who will the court listen to? A professional doctor or retired neighbors? Don't worry, everything will go smoothly. The key is to act quickly before he gets suspicious and rewrites the will." I heard them going through the kitchen, opening cupboards, checking the fridge. "Look, the milk's expired," Raven said. "More proof that he doesn't take care of himself. And here are the blood pressure pills. He forgot to take them," Elliot added. I clenched my fists. "I bought the milk yesterday. It couldn't have expired. He took the pills in the morning, as usual. They were deliberately misrepresenting the facts, painting a picture of my inability to take care of myself." "I think we have enough material," Raven said. "Let's go. I'll call Lewis and discuss the details of the lawsuit." They left the house. I could hear the car starting, the gravel crunching under the wheels. It wasn't until the sound of the engine died away that I let myself breathe out. "So here's the plan. Declare me crazy and take the house. A house that to me is not just walls and a roof, but a memory of Virginia, of our life, a life I can't seem to pass on to my son." I slowly walked out of the garage, went into the house, and sat down at the kitchen table. On the countertop were my blood pressure pills, neatly tucked away in the container where I kept a week's supply of medication. I remembered exactly taking my morning dose. They'd moved the pills around to give the appearance of my forgetfulness. There was a bottle of milk in the fridge. I bought it yesterday at the supermarket on Maple Street. The expiration date was in a week, but on the bottle I pulled out, the date had been altered with a pen. Someone had erased the number, turning the 16th into the 13th. The milk had supposedly expired 3 days ago. I sat back in my chair and covered my face with my hands. What am I going to do? How do I fight this conspiracy? They will lie, tamper with evidence, distort reality. The word of a son and his realtor wife against the word of a 65-year-old widower. Who will the court believe? I lifted my head and looked at Virginia's picture on the wall. She was smiling, looking at me through the years. "What would you do, Virgie?" I whispered. And in that moment, I knew the answer. Virginia never backed down in the face of adversity. She fought cancer to her last breath, never giving up, never losing her dignity. and I will not give up. I will not let them take my home and my life. I got a notebook and a pen out of my desk drawer. If they're building a case against me, I need to prepare a defense. I started writing down everything I'd heard today, every detail of their conversation, forging the date on the milk, shifting the pills, the name of the psychiatrist willing to perjure himself. And then I remembered something important, something Elliot and Raven didn't seem to know, or had forgotten. The notice of the lawsuit came 3 days after that conversation in the kitchen. A plain envelope, unremarkable among the bills and flyers. I almost threw it away without opening it. But something, maybe the tax collector's long-standing habit of checking all correspondence, made me open the envelope. Official paper from the Healdsburg County Courthouse. In black and white, Elliot Chandler and Raven Chandler v. Noam Chandler. Case for declaration of incapacity and appointment of guardian. Even though I had been forewarned by the overheard conversation, seeing it on paper, with stamps and signatures, was another matter entirely. It was like a blow under the breath. I sank into a chair in the hallway, clutching the paper so tight my knuckles turned white. The lawsuit claimed that I, Noam Chandler, suffered from progressive cognitive decline, characteristic of the early stages of dementia. That I am unable to adequately assess my financial situation, manage my household, and provide for my own safety. That I pose a danger to myself and others due to forgetfulness and inadequate assessment of reality. Attached to the lawsuit was a report from one doctor, Lewis Barrett, a psychiatrist who allegedly examined me and found disturbing symptoms of dementia. I never met this doctor, never had any kind of examination. Fabricated lies, filthy, filthy lies. The anger came in waves, first cold, stiffening, then hot, burning my throat and eyes. My own son, flesh of my flesh, the child I'd taught to ride a bike, the child I'd read bedtime stories to, the child I'd supported in every endeavor, betrayed me, for money, for a goddamn house. I got up and walked to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water, drank it in one gulp. My hands were shaking. The lawsuit paper was on the table, official evidence of the severing of the last link between me and my son. My first impulse was to call Elliot, to yell at him, to tell him what I thought of his meanness. But my years at the IRS taught me restraint and strategic thinking. You can't show your opponent that you've uncovered his plan. You can't act on emotion. I reread the lawsuit again, more carefully. The bottom line was simple. Elliot and Raven wanted the court to declare me incompetent and appoint Elliot as my guardian. That would give him complete control over my finances and property, including the house. The lawsuit listed evidence of my incapacity, overdue bills, which didn't exist, spoiled food in the refrigerator, milk with a forged date, forgotten medications, which I took regularly, and an unkempt house, which I kept in perfect order. Lies piled on lies. The preliminary hearing was scheduled in 2 weeks. I had 14 days to prepare my defense. The first thing I did was call the court to confirm the authenticity of the lawsuit. Unfortunately, it was genuine. The clerk advised me to hire an attorney and prepare counter-evidence. I sat down at my computer and began searching for Healdsburg attorneys specializing in family law and custody. Most of the names told me nothing, but one caught my eye. Heather Frost, a partner in the law firm of Frost & Associates. I vaguely remembered the name. After a few minutes of thought, I remembered. 10 years ago, she had represented an elderly lady in a case against her nephew, who had tried to take her house away from her in a similar fashion, and won. I called Heather Frost's office and explained the situation to the receptionist. I was given an appointment for the next day. The Frost & Associates office was in an old brick building in downtown Healdsburg. Inside it was cool and smelled of wood polish, a smell I had always associated with reliability and stability. Heather Frost turned out to be a short woman in her 50s with short graying hair and shrewd gray eyes. She greeted me with a handshake, firm, confident, and invited me into her office. Mr. Chandler, I've read the lawsuit your son and daughter-in-law have filed, she said as we sat down. Before we start discussing the details, I want to ask you a direct question. Do you have any cognitive impairments that I should know about? I appreciated her directness. None, Ms. Frost. I had a complete medical evaluation 6 months ago. The doctor said I'm in great shape for my age. I have no memory problems, and I'm in complete control of my finances and household. She watched me carefully, evaluating my speech, my behavior. Good, she finally said. Now tell me everything from the beginning. How did this conflict with your son arise? I recounted the history of my relationship with Elliot, how it had changed after he married Raven, how the pressure to sell the house had gradually built up. Told about an overheard conversation, about faking the date on the milk, about shifting pills. Heather took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me with a long look. Mr. Chandler. I won't hide it. We have a difficult case. The word of an elderly father against the word of his son and his wife. They will insist that you are paranoid, that the overheard conversation is a figment of your imagination, that you yourself forgot to take your medicine and did not notice the expired milk. But that's a lie, I exclaimed. I know, she said calmly, but the court needs evidence, not emotion. We need to gather evidence of your capacity and, if possible, evidence of their bad faith. What kind of evidence? First, an independent medical examination. We need a report from a reputable neurologist or psychiatrist that you have no evidence of dementia. Second, testimony from neighbors, friends, and acquaintances that you lead an active lifestyle, maintain social contacts, and respond appropriately to circumstances. Third, documentation that you are successfully managing your finances, bank statements, bills paid on time, tax returns. She paused, then added, and if possible, we need to understand the true motives of your son and his wife. Why do they need the money from the sale of the house so urgently? Do they have financial problems? Debts? Problems with the law, perhaps? I've been thinking. In recent years, our relationship with Elliot had become so formal that I knew little about his life. He worked as a financial analyst for high-tech investments, making good money, or so it seemed to me. Raven was a successful realtor. At first glance, they shouldn't have had financial problems. I don't know, I answered honestly, but I'll try to find out. Okay, Heather nodded. Start getting your paperwork together. I'll make an appointment for you to see Dr. Price, who is a specialist in cognitive impairment and is often an expert witness in court. His opinion will carry weight. In the meantime, I'll prepare a response to the lawsuit and a motion for an independent evaluation. As I left Heather Frost's office, I felt a little better. I had a plan of action, an ally in the fight, but the bitterness of betrayal hadn't gone away. Every time I thought of Elliot and Raven planning to take my home away from me, my last connection to Virginia, my insides clenched with pain and anger. When I got home, I immediately started gathering my paperwork. I pulled out folders of bank statements, bills, receipts. Everything was in perfect order, a habit developed over years of working with taxes. Every bill paid on time, every expense recorded, every document filed and numbered. Then I called my longtime friend and neighbor, Jack Owens. We had known each other for almost 40 years, since Virginia and I had moved to Healdsburg. Jack was a retired history teacher, a widower like me. Once a week we played chess and discussed the news. Jack, I need your help, I said when he answered. I'm in serious trouble. I told him about Elliot and Raven's lawsuit. Jack was shocked. Noam, that's crazy, he exclaimed. You're one of the most collected and appropriate people I know. What the hell is dementia? Exactly, I said. But they're trying to prove otherwise. And I need witnesses to testify that I'm of sound mind and memory. Of course I'm a witness, Jack said without hesitation. And Martha too. And Bob and Edna. And the whole chess club. Hell, the whole Healdsburg knows you're all right. His encouragement was like a breath of fresh air. It made me feel like I wasn't alone in this struggle. Thank you, Jack. That means a lot to me. You're welcome, buddy. We're not going to let those young vultures take your house away from you. After talking to Jack, I sat down at my computer and started looking up information on the company Elliot worked for. High-Tech Investments was a small investment firm specializing in technology startups. Their website was full of optimistic statements about revolutionary investment strategies and unprecedented growth opportunities. But I couldn't find specific information about the company's financial performance. I remembered that a year ago there was an article in the local newspaper about high-tech investments, something to do with business expansion. I rummaged in the closet where I kept old newspapers, another habit Virginia had teased me about. After half an hour of searching, I found the issue I wanted. The article was small on page 3. High-Tech Investments was announcing the launch of a new investment fund focused on regional tech startups. They promised investors 20% annual interest, a figure that, even to me, a non-investment specialist, seemed suspiciously high. Elliot Chandler, a leading analyst and strategist, was mentioned among the fund's executives. I put the paper aside. It didn't answer the question of why Elliot and Raven needed the money so urgently, but it was a clue. 20% annual interest was too good to be true. Perhaps the fund was running into trouble. Maybe the investors were demanding their money back? The next day I went to see Dr. Price, as Heather had arranged. He was an older gentleman with a neat white beard and kind eyes. The examination was thorough. Tests for memory, attention, logical thinking, and spatial orientation. I answered calmly and confidently, knowing I had no cognitive problems. Mr. Chandler, Doctor, Price said when the examination was complete. I see no evidence of dementia or other cognitive impairment. Your results are normal for your age, and in some respects even above normal. Thank you, Doctor, I replied with relief, even though I had no doubts about the result. I will prepare a formal report for the court, he continued, and if necessary, I will be ready to act as an expert. As I left Dr. Price's office, I felt a surge of energy. The first step had been taken. I have a medical report that proves I'm legally competent, but that wasn't enough. I needed to understand what was going on with Elliot and Raven, why they were so desperate to get the money from the sale of the house. I decided to pay a visit to an old colleague of mine, Alfred Daniels. We worked together at the IRS for almost 20 years. Although Alfred had been retired for 10 years, he kept in touch with former co-workers and was always up to date on Healdsburg's financial news. Alfred lived in a small house on the outskirts of town. We arranged to meet for lunch at his favorite cafe, Laura's. When I arrived, he was already sitting at a table by the window, studying the menu. Gnome! Alfred stood up to shake my hand. I haven't seen you in ages. How's life? Could be better, Al, I said, sitting down across from him. I'm in trouble. I told him about Elliot and Raven's suit, about the attempts to have me declared incompetent, about the upcoming trial. Alfred listened, shaking his head. Bastards, pardon the expression, he said when I was done. My own son, and to pull something like this. I need to understand why they need the money so badly, I said. Elliot works at High-Tech Investments. Have you heard anything about them? Alfred frowned. High-Tech Investments? Yes, I have, and it's not good. Rumor has it they're in serious trouble. Something to do with investment misconduct. One of my former colleagues, who now works in financial oversight, hinted that they were investigating. I felt a chill run down my spine. An investigation? About what? I don't know exactly, Alfred answered. But from the hints, it sounds like something serious. Maybe financial fraud, misuse of investor funds. If your son is involved in this, and especially if he's an executive, as you say, he could face not only job loss, but criminal prosecution. So there you have it. It's all starting to come together. Elliot's in trouble. He could be facing jail time. And he needs money fast. Maybe to pay back stolen investor funds, or to hire good lawyers, or even to flee the country. Al, can you elaborate? I asked. I need concrete facts for the court. Alfred hesitated. I can't promise, but I'll try. I have acquaintances in the financial supervision. Maybe they could share information informally. I'd be very grateful, I said. It could save my house. We finished our lunch discussing old acquaintances and the news of the city. Despite the difficult situation, it was nice to talk to Alfred, to remember old times. When we said goodbye at the entrance to the cafe, he put his hand on my shoulder. Hold on, Gnome. We won't let those young rascals fool you. When I got home, I called Heather Frost and told her about my conversation with Alfred. It's valuable information, Mr. Chandler, she said. Alfred, if we can prove that your son is under investigation or has financial problems, it would call into question his motives and integrity. But we need concrete facts, documents, evidence. I understand, I replied. I'll keep looking. Good, Heather said. And I got the results of Dr. Price's examination. Great news. No signs of dementia or other cognitive impairment. That's a strong argument in our favor. After talking to Heather, I felt a surge of determination. I wasn't going to give up without a fight. If Elliot and Raven thought they could easily take my house away from me by declaring me a crazy old man, they were sorely mistaken. I sat down at my computer and began searching for information about high-tech investments and the possible financial scandals associated with them. I spent most of the day digging through financial news, investor forums, and lawsuit databases, and I found some interesting leads. On one investor forum, there were complaints about high-tech investments. People wrote that they could not withdraw their money, that the company did not respond to inquiries, that the promised 20% per annum turned out to be an empty promise. One user even claimed to have filed a complaint with the financial supervisor. In the local newspaper, I found another article, a more recent one. It mentioned in passing that high-tech investments had suspended withdrawal operations from a new investment fund due to technical problems. A classic financial scammer's excuse. I printed out everything I could find and put it in a folder for Heather. It wasn't direct evidence, but it confirmed that something was wrong with Elliot's company. That evening, Alfred called. "Noam, I found out something," he said without preamble. "A friend of mine from the Financial Supervision Authority has confirmed that high-tech investments is indeed under investigation. They suspect a pyramid scheme, taking money from new investors to pay interest to old investors. Classic Ponzi scheme." I felt my insides tighten. "My son is a financial fraud? And Elliot," I asked, "is he involved?" My friend couldn't say for sure, but he hinted that the investigation involved the entire management of the company. "If your son was a fund manager, as you say, he is almost certainly under suspicion." I thanked Alfred and hung up. I sat back in my chair trying to make sense of what I had heard. My son, whom I had raised, who had been instilled with the values of honesty and integrity, had cheated people. And now he's trying to cheat me, take my house away to solve his legal problems. What would Virginia say if she found out about this? She always saw only good in Elliot, even when I noticed his selfishness and self-interest. "He's just young, Noam," she'd say. "All young people think of themselves first. As he grows up, he'll change. But Elliot is 37 now. At some point, I had to admit that my son hadn't grown up to be the man I wanted him to be. The next day, I met with Heather Frost and told her everything I'd learned about high-tech investments and Elliot's possible involvement in financial fraud. "These are very serious allegations, Mr. Chandler," Heather said as she looked over the printouts. "If your son is indeed under investigation for financial fraud, it completely changes the context of the lawsuit. He's not trying to gain control of your assets for your benefit, but to solve his own legal problems." "Exactly," I nodded. "But we need more concrete evidence," Heather continued. "The information from your friend is valuable, but it's still rumor. We need documents, official confirmation." "How can we get that?" Heather thought for a moment. "I'll file a request with the financial watchdog as your representative. They may not be able to disclose all the details of the current investigation, but they can confirm that it exists. I'll also check to see if there are any civil lawsuits already filed against high-tech investments and your son personally." "What about the trial?" I asked. "It's in 10 days. "We're better prepared than you think," Heather smiled. "We have Dr. Price's report confirming your legal capacity. We have documents showing that you've successfully managed your finances. We'll have testimony from your friends and neighbors. And now we also have a lead on your son's possible true motives." I nodded, feeling somewhat relieved. But then I remembered something important. "Heather, the lawsuit mentions a doctor, Lewis Barrett, who supposedly examined me and diagnosed me with dementia. But I never met him. That's a total lie. I've already checked out this doctor." "Barrett," Heather said. He does exist, licensed as a psychiatrist. But he had a disciplinary problem 3 years ago, accused of giving false medical reports for money. The case was dropped, but he's notorious in the medical community. That's another argument in our favor." Raven mentioned in the conversation I overheard that she knew a psychiatrist who would sign papers for money. I remembered. "You see," Heather made a note in her notebook. "It's all coming together. We'll prove that the lawsuit against you is not a concern for your well-being, but a cynical attempt to seize your property." The day of the trial came unexpectedly quickly. 2 weeks of preparation flew by like a day. Meetings with Heather Frost, gathering documents, talking to witnesses. I barely slept the night before the hearing, going over arguments, evidence, possible scenarios in my head. By morning, I was exhausted but determined. Heather advised me to wear a strict suit. You need to look put together and confident, she said. No crumpled shirts or unkempt hair. The judge will be evaluating you at a glance. I pulled out of my closet the dark blue suit I'd worn to Virginia's funeral. It had hung there for 5 years untouched, holding sad memories. But today it was to serve a different purpose, to help me preserve our home, our memory. The suit was a little loose. I'd lost weight over the years, but overall it was a decent fit. I carefully shaved, combed my hair, even dripped the cologne Elliot had given me last Christmas. Bitter irony. Heather picked me up at 9 sharp. Her black Volvo smelled of leather and lavender. She looked collected and confident in a strict dark gray suit and with a folder of documents on her lap. "Ready, Mr. Chandler?" she asked as I got into the car. "As ready as I can be," I replied. "I never thought I'd be suing my own son." "I understand," she nodded. "But remember, today is no place for sentimentality. Your son is trying to take your house away from you under false pretenses. We must be firm and consistent." I nodded. Heather was right. The time for fatherly sentiment had passed. Now it was just a fight for survival. The Healdsburg courthouse was an old brick structure with columns at the entrance and a wide staircase. I'd been here before, but only as a witness in tax cases. I never thought I'd find myself here as a defendant, much less in a lawsuit from my own son. Inside smelled like wood polish and old papers. Heather and I went up to the second floor, where conference room number 4 was located, and there, at the door, I saw them. Elliot stood leaning against the wall, with a tense face and a wandering gaze. Next to him was Raven, in a tight black dress more appropriate for a cocktail party than a courtroom, and their lawyer, a full, middle-aged man with a red face and thinning hair. When they noticed us, Elliot averted his gaze, but Raven smiled. Not just a smile, a smirk, a grin of superiority and certainty of victory, as if she'd already seen moving into my house, rearranging the furniture, throwing out the pictures of Virginia. I felt a wave of anger rising inside. Heather, as if sensing it, squeezed my shoulder lightly. "Calm down, Mr. Chandler," she whispered. "Don't be provoked." We came closer. Elliot and Raven's lawyer stepped forward. "Dash Ms. Frost," he nodded to Heather. "Dash Mr. Chandler. I'm Bradford Lynch, representing your son and his wife." "Dash Mr. Lynch," Heather replied coldly. "I guess I'll see you in the hall." She turned to go into the conference room, but Raven suddenly spoke. "Gnome." Her voice was soft, almost caring, but her eyes remained cold. "You look tired. It's so stressful for you, all this court business. Wouldn't it have been better to settle things amicably? Elliot and I only want to help." I looked at her, then at my son. Elliot was still avoiding my gaze. "Help?" I asked quietly. "By taking away my house? By declaring me crazy?" "Dad, we didn't say you were crazy," Elliot finally spoke up. "It's just that you're having trouble remembering, organizing. You need help." "The only help I need is for you to leave me alone," I replied. The doors of the courtroom opened and the bailiff announced the start of the hearing. We went inside and took our seats, me and Heather at the defendant's table, Elliot, Raven, and their lawyer at the plaintiff's table. The room was small with dark wood paneling and a state flag behind the judge's seat. The public benches were nearly empty, just a few curious people and my friends who had come to cheer. Jack, Alfred, a couple of other neighbors. Judge Harris entered the room, a tall, lean man in his 60s with gray hair and an attentive gaze. Everyone stood up. After a formal start, Elliot and Raven's attorney took the stand. "Your Honor," Bradford Lynch began, "we are presenting the case for the appointment of a guardian for Noam Chandler, a 65-year-old resident of Healdsburg, who unfortunately suffers from a progressive cognitive disorder. His son, Elliot Chandler, and his daughter-in-law, Raven Chandler, are concerned about his condition and believe he is incapable of managing his finances and property on his own." Lynch continued to talk, describing my supposed memory problems, my inability to keep track of the house, my disorientation and paranoia. Every word was a lie, every statement a distortion of reality. I sat clenching my fists under the table, trying to keep a calm expression on my face. "We have a report from Dr. Lewis Barrett, a respected psychiatrist who diagnosed Mr. Chandler with the early stages of dementia," Lynch continued. Dr. Barrett is here today, ready to testify and answer the court's questions. I looked toward the witness stand and saw a man in his 50s with a goatee and a nervous look. So this is the same doctor, Barrett, who supposedly examined me, a man I'd never seen in my life. After Lynch, Heather took the floor. She spoke clearly, confidently, without emotional outbursts. Your Honor, we categorically deny all allegations of my client's incapacity. Noam Chandler is in perfect health, both physically and mentally. He successfully manages his finances, maintains social contacts, and leads an active lifestyle. We have a report from Dr. Price, a leading specialist in cognitive disorders, who has thoroughly examined Mr. Chandler and found no evidence of dementia. Heather paused and then continued in a harsher tone. Furthermore, we have reason to believe that this lawsuit was not filed out of concern for Mr. Chandler's well-being, but out of self-interest. The plaintiffs, Elliot and Raven Chandler, are in financial distress and seek to gain control of Mr. Chandler's property, particularly his home, which is valued at $700,000. I noticed Elliot tense up and Raven turn pale. They didn't expect us to know about their financial problems. Then the questioning of witnesses began. Dr. Barrett spoke first, claiming to have examined me and found troubling symptoms of dementia. When asked by Heather when exactly he had examined me, the doctor was confused about the dates. When asked about the specific tests he performed, he was vague. When Heather showed him Dr. Price's report, he became nervous and stammered. Dr. Barrett, Heather asked, is it true that 3 years ago there were charges against you for giving false medical reports for money? It was a misunderstanding, Barrett mumbled. The case was dropped. But the charges were filed, right? Yes, but... And isn't it true that you know Raven Chandler personally? Barrett looked at Raven, then at the judge. We, met at a few events. Isn't it true that you've never met my client before today? Barrett began to sweat. Yeah, I can't remember exactly. Just yes or no, doctor. Barrett, yay. He hesitated, then gave up. No, I haven't. There was a commotion in the courtroom. Judge Harris banged his gavel, calling for order. Mr. Lynch, he addressed Elliot and Raven's attorney. This is a serious charge. Your key witness admits that he never met the defendant, yet he provided a medical report on his condition. Lynch looked confused. Your Honor, perhaps doctor. Barrett is confusing dates. I'm sure the examination was done. No, it wasn't, I said firmly. I have never met this man. Judge Harris looked at me carefully, then at Dr. Barrett, then at Elliot and Raven. Let's continue, he said at last. But I must say that the credibility of Dr. Barrett's testimony is now in great doubt. Dr. Price then spoke. He went into detail about the examination, the tests I'd undergone, the results that showed no cognitive impairment. His presentation was professional, confident, and convincing. My friends and neighbors then testified. Jack talked about our weekly chess games, how I always remember all the moves and can discuss games played months ago. Alfred talked about my long career in the IRS, my reputation for being neat and pedantic. Neighbors described how I keep the house and garden in perfect condition, get involved in the community, and help with local events. Raven in the plaintiff's bench looked increasingly irritated. Elliot increasingly nervous. After lunch, Heather presented financial documents proving that I pay all my bills on time, manage my investments wisely, and maintain a perfect credit rating. All of this contradicted Elliot and Raven's statements about my inability to manage my finances. Your Honor, Heather said, as you can see, there is no objective evidence of my client's incapacity. On the contrary, all the evidence shows that he is in perfect health and is handling his affairs perfectly. Judge Harris nodded. I am inclined to agree, Ms. Frost. However, there remains the question of the plaintiff's motives. You mentioned that they may have financial problems. Do you have any evidence for that assertion? Heather looked at me, then at Elliot and Raven. Your Honor, we have information that the company that Elliot Chandler works for, High Tech Investments, is under investigation by the financial watchdog on suspicion of running a pyramid scheme. We believe that Elliot Chandler may be implicated in these frauds and needs funds to cover shortfalls or pay legal fees. Elliot's face contorted with fear. Raven grabbed his arm, whispered something fiercely. Their lawyer jumped up. Your Honor, these are unsubstantiated accusations. We're having a hearing about Noam Chandler's capacity, not the activities of high-tech investments. The plaintiff's motives are directly relevant, Mr. Lynch, Heather countered. If the lawsuit is not brought out of concern for the defendant's welfare, but out of self-interest, the court should take that into account. Judge Harris hesitated. Do you have concrete evidence of Elliot Chandler's involvement in financial fraud, Ms. Frost? We have circumstantial evidence, Your Honor. Articles in financial publications, investor complaints in forums. But most importantly, we have a witness who can shed light on the situation. A witness? The judge frowned. I don't see any more witnesses on your list. This witness was not on the original list, Your Honor, as we only contacted him last night. I asked the court to allow the questioning of Polly Abbott, Elliot Chandler's former colleague at High Tech Investments. Lynch jumped up again. Objection, Your Honor. This is a violation of procedure. We were not notified of this witness. As I said, we only contacted her last night, Heather replied calmly. We had no opportunity to notify the other side. In addition, her testimony is critical to understanding the plaintiff's true motives, Judge Harris thought again. I will allow this witness to be examined, he finally said. Not charmed, but I warn you, Miss Frost, the testimony must be directly relevant to Mr. Chandler's competency case. Absolutely, Your Honor, Heather nodded, calling the witness Polly Abbott. The courtroom doors opened, and a woman in her 30s entered, short, with short-cropped brown hair and a determined expression. She walked to the witness stand without looking at anyone but the judge. I looked at Elliot. My son had gone pale as if he'd seen a ghost. His hands resting on the table were visibly trembling. Raven confusedly shifted her gaze from Elliot to Polly, clearly not understanding what was going on. Polly took the oath and sat down on the witness stand. Heather walked over to her. Ms. Abbott, please introduce yourself to the court and tell us about your relationship with Elliot Chandler. My name is Polly Abbott, the woman began in a confident voice. I worked at High Tech Investments for 3 years, until last month. I was a financial analyst and worked directly with Elliot Chandler, who was our department head. And why did you leave the company, Ms. Abbott? I quit when I realized the company was engaging in illegal activity, specifically when I realized that Elliot Chandler was running a classic pyramid scheme under the guise of an investment fund. A murmur went up in the hall. The judge tapped his gavel again. Elliot sat with his head down, and Raven whispered furiously in his ear. Tell me more about it, Heather asked. High Tech Investments launched a new investment fund about a year ago, Polly continued. They promised investors a 20% annual return, an unrealistically high return. Everything went smoothly for the first few months and the payments were made on time. But then the problems started. Investors who wanted to withdraw their funds encountered delays and excuses. I started asking questions and analyzing financial flows, and I found out that payments to old investors were made at the expense of contributions from new investors. It's a classic Ponzi scheme. And Elliot Chandler knew about this? Not just knew. Polly looked directly at Elliot. He was the architect of the whole scheme. He falsified earnings reports, convinced hesitant investors not to withdraw, attracted new clients. When you found out about this, what did you do? First, I tried to talk to Elliot. I pointed out the illegality of such activity, the inevitability of collapse. He, laughed, said he had it under control, that by the time the scheme collapsed, he'd be in the clear. His expression. I sat stunned by these revelations. My son is not just a participant, but the organizer of a pyramid scheme, a man who deliberately deceived people, stole their money. What had happened to the boy Virginia and I had taught honesty and integrity? What happened next? Heather asked. I quit my job and went to financial supervision, Polly replied. I gave them all the documents I could gather, copies of falsified reports, records of conversations, lists of investors. They started an investigation. As far as I know, it's still ongoing, but it's nearing completion, and Elliot Chandler is facing not only job loss, but criminal prosecution. Lynch jumped up. Your Honor, none of this has anything to do with Noam Chandler's competency case. On the contrary, Heather objected, it's directly related to the plaintiff's motives. Miss Abbott, do you know what Elliot Chandler's financial situation is right now? I do, Polly nodded. Since the investigation began, the company has frozen all accounts. Elliot hasn't received a paycheck in 2 months. Moreover, some investors, having learned about the fraud, filed civil suits against him personally. He's facing multi-million-dollar settlements. Did Elliot Chandler ever tell you about his father and his house? Polly nodded. Yes, several times, especially in recent months when the situation with the fund began to deteriorate. He said that his father owned a valuable house that could be sold for a lot of money, that it could be his backup parachute if things went south. Did he ever mention his father's health or mental state? No, never. On the contrary, he said that his father was a former tax inspector, very pedantic and attentive to detail. He once even joked that he was afraid to show his father the foundation's financial statements because he would immediately notice discrepancies. I heard Raven draw in a sharp intake of air. Elliot sat with his hands over his face. Miss Abbott, Heather continued, do you know anything about Elliot Chandler's plans to gain control of his father's estate? Yes, Polly nodded. About a month ago, when it became clear that an investigation was imminent, Elliot discussed with one of our lawyers the possibility of declaring his father incapacitated. He asked how long the process would take, how quickly the house could be sold after the guardianship was granted. The lawyer advised him to find a cooperative doctor who could confirm a diagnosis of dementia. So in your opinion, the lawsuit to declare Noam Chandler incompetent was not filed out of concern for his well-being, but to gain control of his estate in order to solve Elliot Chandler's financial problems? That's exactly right, Polly said firmly. Elliot needs the money to pay off investors and avoid jail. His father's house is the quickest way to get that money. There was silence in the room. I looked at my son, trying to see something of the boy I knew and loved. But all I saw was a stranger willing to betray his own father for money. Judge Harris interrupted the silence. Miss Abbott, did you provide this information to the FCA? Yes, Your Honor, Polly answered. All of my testimony is documented as part of the official investigation. Good, the judge nodded. Mr. Lynch, do you have any questions for the witness? Elliot and Raven's lawyer looked confused. He was clearly not prepared for this turn of events. Yes, Your Honor, he said, rising. Miss Abbott, did you have any personal conflicts with Elliot Chandler? Only professional ones, Polly answered. I objected to his illegal actions. He ignored my objections. Isn't it true that you were fired from high-tech investments for breach of confidentiality? No, that's not true. I resigned of my own volition, as evidenced by my resignation letter, of which the financial supervisor has a copy. Lynch continued to ask questions in an attempt to cast doubt on the credibility of Polly's testimony, but to no avail. She answered confidently, consistently, without getting confused about the details. It was obvious that she was telling the truth. Finally, Judge Harris stopped the questioning. That's enough, Mr. Lynch. The court had a clear picture of the situation. He turned to Elliot. Mr. Chandler, do you wish to comment on Miss Abbott's testimony? Elliot raised his head slowly. His face was gray, his eyes blank. No, Your Honor, he said quietly. In that case, Judge Harris said, the court is ready to rule. There was a tense silence in the courtroom. Judge Harris looked carefully at Polly Abbott, then at Elliot, then at me. His gaze was penetrating and serious. Before the court rule, he said, I'd like to hear more about the situation at High-Tech Investments and Elliot Chandler's status in the company. Miss Abbott, you mentioned that he was under investigation. Can you be more specific? Polly nodded and straightened up in the witness stand. Yes, Your Honor. As I said, I left the company about a month ago and went to the financial supervisor with evidence of fraudulent activity. The investigation began immediately. As far as I know, Elliot Chandler was officially fired from High-Tech Investments 3 days ago. I looked at my son. He sat with his head down, unresponsive to Polly's words. Raven beside him looked confused and frightened. The reason for the dismissal, Polly continued, was the financial irregularities discovered. Elliot Chandler had used a Ponzi scheme whereby payments to old investors were made from the contributions of new investors rather than from actual investment returns as stated. Moreover, a significant portion of the funds raised were withdrawn into Elliot Chandler's personal accounts and used for his personal needs. And what sums are we talking about? The judge asked. According to the preliminary data of the financial supervision, We are talking about $4,300,000 of attracted investments, of which about $1,200,000 were appropriated by Elliot Chandler personally. There were gasps of surprise in the courtroom. I felt my insides tighten. $1,200,000? My son stole $1,200,000? Your Honor, intervened Lynch, Elliot's attorney. These are all unsubstantiated accusations. The investigation is still ongoing. No formal charges have been filed. That's not true, Polly objected calmly. Last night, the Financial Supervision Authority handed over the case file to the prosecutor's office. As far as I know, Elliot Chandler will be formally charged with fraud, embezzlement, and violation of securities laws in the next few days. I looked at my son again. He seemed even smaller now, as if he were trying to physically disappear, to shrink to invisibility. Raven, on the other hand, had straightened up and whispered angrily in Elliot's ear. "Do you have any documentary proof of this information?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor." Polly opened her briefcase and took out a folder with documents. "Here is a copy of my statement to the financial supervisor with the attached evidence, as well as a copy of the preliminary investigation report that was provided to me as a key witness." She handed the documents to the bailiff, who took them to the judge. Judge Harris began to study the papers, occasionally raising his gaze to Elliot. There was a tense silence in the room, broken only by the rustle of turning pages. I sat there, stunned by the magnitude of the betrayal that had been revealed. All this time I'd thought Elliot was just a selfish son who wanted a quick buck from the sale of my house. But the reality was far worse. My son is a criminal, a fraud, a man who has defrauded the trust of countless people and stolen their money. And now he was trying to use me and my house to save himself from the consequences of his actions. "Ms. Abbott," the judge finally spoke, pulling away from the documents. "This information is very disturbing. Tell me, is there a connection between Elliot Chandler's financial problems and his desire to gain control of his father's estate?" "Yes, Your Honor," Polly answered confidently. "As I mentioned, Elliot repeatedly referred to his father's house as his reserve parachute. When it became clear that the Ponzi scheme was about to collapse and investors were demanding a refund, he stepped up his plans to gain control of the house. I personally heard him discussing with a lawyer the possibility of declaring his father incapacitated so he could sell the house quickly." "Why did he need the money specifically?" "Elliot has two options, Your Honor. One is to use the money from the sale of the house to partially reimburse the investors to mitigate any possible punishment. The second is to use the money to flee the country before formal charges are filed." He had mentioned both possibilities in conversations with colleagues. I felt a chill run down my spine. My son was planning to flee the country, abandon his wife, his hometown, me, and disappear with the stolen money? "I see," the judge nodded and turned to Elliot. "Mr. Chandler, what have you to say in answer to these charges?" Elliot raised his head slowly. His face was gray and his eyes were red. "Your Honor, He hesitated, then sighed heavily. "I cannot deny the facts presented by Ms. Abbott, but I want to emphasize that my actions were motivated by desperation, not malice." "Desperation?" the judge interjected. "Yes, Your Honor. The fund was losing money and investors were demanding the promised returns. Yeah, I went to extreme measures to hold things together. It was a mistake, I admit, but my intentions were not inherently criminal." "And your intentions regarding your father and his house?" the judge asked harshly. "So, were they also motivated by desperation rather than malice?" Elliot lowered his eyes. "Yeah, I did need the funds to solve my investor problems, but I was also genuinely concerned about my father's condition. He lives alone, in a big house that's hard to maintain." At that moment, the unexpected happened. Raven rose from her seat. "Your Honor," she said in a trembling voice, "may I say something?" Judge Harris raised his eyebrows in surprise but nodded. "Please, Mrs. Chandler." Raven turned to Elliot, and for the first time I saw on her face not cold calculation or self-assurance, but real anger and pain. "You lied to me," she said, turning to her husband. "All this time you've been lying. About the company, about the money, about your father's house. You told me that Noam had a real memory problem, that he needed our help. You forced me into this." This disgusting spectacle. Elliot tried to take her hand, but she yanked it away as if from a poisonous snake. Raven, I can explain. Explain what? Her voice shook with rage. That you stole $1,200,000? That you were planning to flee the country? To abandon me? Or that you used me to take the house from your own father under false pretenses? She turned to the judge. Your Honor, I want to state that I had no knowledge of my husband's financial fraud. He told me the company was in temporary difficulties, but everything was under control. As for Noam, she glanced in my direction. Elliot has convinced me that his father is indeed suffering from dementia, that he forgets things, can't take care of himself. Yeah, I believed him, and I agreed to help with the guardianship proceedings, thinking it was really in Noam's best interest. The judge listened intently without interrupting. I didn't know Elliot was planning to sell the house as soon as he got custody, Raven continued. He said that we would look for a suitable place for Noam, and only then, perhaps in a year or two, would we consider selling. I didn't realize he needed the money immediately to cover the embezzlement or to flee the country. She turned to me and I saw tears in her eyes. Noam, I apologize. I was deceived as you were. If I had known the truth, I would never have gotten involved. I didn't know whether to believe her or not. Raven was always a good actress, but something in her voice, in her eyes, seemed sincere. Perhaps she really didn't know the whole truth, or more likely, knew part of the truth, but not the full extent of the deception. It's a lie, Elliot suddenly exclaimed, jumping up from his seat. Raven knew everything. She'd suggested the custody idea herself. She'd found this doctor. Barrett on her own, she'd planned how to sell the house quickly. Raven recoiled from her husband as if struck by a blow. How dare you? Her voice shook. Chihuam, after everything you've done, you're still trying to accuse me? Order in the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel. Dash, Mr. Chandler, take your seat. Mrs. Chandler, return to your seat. They complied, but continued to look at each other with undisguised hostility. I watched the scene with mixed feelings. On the one hand, their quarrel only confirmed that the lawsuit against me was based on lies. On the other hand, it was painful to see my son's family crumble, even if that family was built on dishonesty and self-interest. I believe the court has sufficient information to make a decision, Judge Harris said. But before I announce it, I would like to hear from one more witness. Ms. Frost, you mentioned that you have evidence that Dr. Barrett's medical report was forged. Can you present that to the court? Heather is standing up. Yes, Your Honor, I call as a witness Dr. Michael Price, who conducted an independent examination of Noam Chandler. Dr. Price, who had already spoken earlier, took the witness stand again. This time his facial expression was even more serious. Dr. Price, Heather began. Have you read Dr. Barrett's report on my client's condition? Yes, Doctor. Price nodded. I have studied that document carefully. And what is your professional opinion of it? The report contains many inconsistencies and obvious errors, Price replied. For example, it states that the patient was unable to name the current year and the president of the country, which is one of the symptoms of severe dementia. However, in my examination, Mr. Chandler easily answered those questions and also passed much more sophisticated tests of memory and cognitive function. Dementia of this degree could not have developed or disappeared in a short period of time. So you believe that Dr. Barrett's conclusion is untrue? I'm certain of it, Price said firmly. No. Moreover, I have contacted the clinic where the examination was supposedly conducted. There is no record of any admission of Noam Chandler on the dates in question. This report is a forgery, and a rather crude one at that. I looked at Elliot and Raven. They sat without looking at each other, each in their own cocoon of despair and fear. Their plan was crumbling before their eyes, and now all they could do was watch that destruction. Thank you, Dr. Price, Heather said. I have no further questions. Judge Harris nodded. Mr. Lynch, do you have any questions for the witness? Elliot and Raven's attorney looked lost. He clearly wasn't prepared for this turn of events and didn't know how to save his client's position. No, Your Honor, he mumbled. Judge Harris made notes in his notes, then looked up and looked around the courtroom. Based on the evidence and testimony presented, the court dismisses Elliot and Raven Chandler's suit to declare Noam Chandler incompetent and appoint a guardian. All of the evidence indicates that Noam Chandler is in full health, capable of managing his finances and property, and does not need a guardianship. I felt a wave of relief. My house was still mine. Moreover, the judge continued, the court finds that this lawsuit was filed in bad faith to gain control of the defendant's estate in order to solve the plaintiff's personal financial problems. I am forwarding the materials of this case to the prosecutor's office for consideration of initiating a criminal case for forgery of medical documents and attempted fraud. I am also referring information about Elliot Chandler's financial fraud to the appropriate authorities. Elliot sat with his hands covering his face. Raven stared straight ahead with a blank stare. Court is adjourned, Judge Harris said, and banged his gavel. As we left the courtroom, Heather Frost shook my hand. Congratulations, Mr. Chandler. The court is completely on your side. I nodded, but I felt no joy. Only devastation and bitterness at the betrayal. My son, my only child, had turned out to be a criminal and a liar, willing to send his own father to a nursing home for money. What now? I asked as we stepped into the courtroom. Now we have the opportunity to countersue, Heather said, for defamation and attempted fraud. Given all the evidence we've presented, and especially Miss Abbott's testimony, we have a very strong case. Do you think it's necessary? I think it's the right thing to do, Heather said firmly. Your son and his wife weren't just trying to take your house away from you. They were trying to ruin your reputation by declaring you incompetent. They tampered with evidence. They lied to the court. Such actions should not go unpunished. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to just go home and forget about this whole nightmare. But the other part, the part that had been in the IRS for 35 years and was used to order and justice, knew that Heather was right. Okay, I said finally. Let's file a countersuit. Heather smiled and nodded. I'll prepare all the necessary paperwork. Meet me at my office tomorrow to sign everything. We agreed on a time to meet, and Heather left, leaving me alone in the hallway of the courthouse. I was about to head for the exit when I heard a familiar voice. Dad. I turned around. Elliot was standing a few feet away from me, alone, without Raven and without his lawyer. His usually well-groomed appearance had changed to rumpled and unkempt. His tie was loose, his shirt was wrinkled, and his hair was mussed, as if he'd run his hands through it many times in frustration. We need to talk, he said. I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. Where was the smiling boy who used to get straight A's from school and proudly show me his crafts? Where is the teenager with whom we used to go fishing and talk about life until late at night? Where is the young man who cried at his mother's funeral and promised me he would always be there for me? What should we talk about, Elliot? I asked tiredly. You tried to declare me crazy and take away my house. What is there to talk about? I can explain everything, he said hastily. It's not what it looks like. I never meant to hurt you. You never meant to hurt me? I couldn't believe my ears. You fabricated a false medical report that I had dementia. You lied to the court. You planned to sell my house, the house I built with your mother, the house where you grew up to cover your debts or flee the country. And you say you didn't want to hurt me? Elliot lowered his head. I'm confused, Dad. I didn't have a choice. You don't understand the situation I was in. I understand the situation you were in, I interrupted him. Saber, you stole $1,200,000 from investors, and you're going to jail. I understand that. What I don't understand is how my son could become a thief and a crook. Elliot wrinkled his nose as if in physical pain. I'm not a thief, Dad. It wasn't like that. I did plan to return all the money to the investors with interest. I had a strategy. I almost succeeded. But the market crashed and... Don't, Elliot, I shook my head. Don't insult my intelligence. You used a Ponzi scheme, a classic fraud that's been around for 100 years. You knew what you were doing. You knowingly defrauded the people who entrusted you with their life savings. Elliot was silent, unable to find the words to justify himself. Finally, he spoke again, his voice trembling. I made a mistake, Dad, a terrible mistake, but I'm still your son. I'm asking you to help me. If you'll take my side, if you'll tell the court that this is all a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I couldn't believe he was still trying to manipulate me. You stole over $1 million, Elliot. You tried to defraud the court to gain control of my estate. That's not a misunderstanding. This is a crime. Daddy, please. Tears came to Elliot's eyes. I can't survive prison. You know what I'm like. I'm not built for this. I need your help. You're my father. You have to help me. The same selfish attitude I'd noticed in him over the past few years was evident in his words. You have to help, as if parental love meant unconditional support for any of the child's actions, even criminal ones. No, Elliot, I said firmly. I shouldn't help you avoid responsibility for your actions. You're a grown man. You made your choices, and now you have to face the consequences. You're giving up on me? He asked incredulously. Your own son? I'm not giving up on you, Elliot. I refuse to support your lies and your crimes. There's a difference. Elliot stared at me in disbelief, which gradually changed to anger. You've always been like this, he said bitterly. Shannon, always the right one, always the principled Gnome Chandler. Never broke a rule, never compromised, even for his son. I've broken the rules, Elliot, I said quietly, and I've made compromises. But I never stole, I never lied to the court, and I never betrayed my family, and I never taught it to you. What about the affair with the co-worker? Elliot suddenly blurted out. The one that almost got your mom to leave you? You think I don't remember? I was 9, but I heard everything. The way you screamed, the way Mom cried. You betrayed your family too, Dad. So don't lecture me. I felt the blood drain from my face. That mistake, that one moment of weakness years ago that I regretted every day of my life. Yes, I had cheated on Virginia once, during a midlife crisis, and yes, she found out, and it almost destroyed our marriage. But we got over it. I redeemed myself with years of love and fidelity, and I was under the impression that Elliot never knew about this episode. You're right, Elliot, I said, getting over my emotions. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake that hurt your mother, and I've been paying for it for years. But I never denied my guilt, never tried to avoid responsibility. I acknowledged my wrongdoing, apologized, and did everything I could to repair the damage I had done. At that moment, Raven appeared in the hallway. She was walking fast, almost running, her heels clacking loudly on the marble floor. When she saw Elliot and me, she slowed down, but didn't stop. Gnome, she said, coming closer. I need to talk to you. Alone. I have no desire to talk to you or my son, I replied coldly. Please, she sounded desperate. It's important. I have something to explain to you. Don't listen to her, Dad, Elliot intervened. She's lying. She's trying to save herself by blaming it on me. Raven gave him an annihilating glare. Shut up, Elliot. You've said enough already. She turned to me. Gnome, I swear I didn't know the extent of what Elliot was doing. Yes, I knew the company was in trouble. Yes, I knew he needed money, but I had no idea he stole over $1 million from investors. I didn't know he was facing prison. And I honestly believed you were starting to have memory and self-care issues. You're a liar, Elliot shouted. You knew everything. You told me that my father's house was our golden parachute. You're the one who suggested the custody plan. Yes, but I thought it was for his own good, Raven exclaimed. You convinced me that your father couldn't live alone, that he needed care, that the big house was becoming dangerous for him. You manipulated me by using my concern for your father. I watched this altercation with growing disgust. They were both lying, both trying to save themselves at the expense of the other. Neither of them felt any real remorse for trying to take my house away from me. That's enough, I said, raising my voice. I don't want to hear any more of your mutual accusations and excuses. The fact remains that you both participated in the attempt to declare me incompetent and take my house. And now, instead of sincerely repenting, you continue to lie and shift the blame onto each other. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. I'm filing a countersuit for slander and attempted fraud, I said firmly, against both of you. My lawyer's already preparing the papers. Raven went pale. Gnome, no, please. I've already lost everything. My reputation, my career. No one will ever trust me to sell their house again. Yeah, you lost it through your own fault, Raven, I interrupted her. You made a choice when you decided to get involved in this scam. Now you have to live with the consequences. Dad? Elliot took a step toward me. You can't be serious, can you? You can't sue your own son. I can, Elliot, I replied calmly. And I will. not out of revenge, but out of principle. You have to realize that actions have consequences. You can't just betray your family, break the law, lie to the court, and then expect to be forgiven and forgotten. But I'm your son. Elliot sounded genuinely perplexed. I am your flesh and blood. Doesn't that mean anything? It does, I said. That's why it hurts so much. That's why I can't just turn a blind eye. Because you're my son, and I'm responsible for the man you've become. I looked at both of them, Elliot with his confused look, and Raven with her calculating expression that even tears couldn't hide. I'm officially severing all relations with both of you, I said. Don't call me, don't come to my house, don't try to contact me. From now on, we are strangers. Dad, no, Elliot exclaimed. You can't do this. I'm your only son. You stopped being my son when you decided to declare me crazy for money, I replied. When you forged the medical report, when you lied to the court, when you betrayed everything I taught you. I turned to leave, but Raven grabbed my arm. Noam, please, her voice shook. I know I made a mistake. I let Elliot convince me that you needed help, but I never meant to hurt you. I truly believed we were acting in your best interest. I gently but firmly removed her hand. Even if that's true, Raven, and I highly doubt it, you were still involved in trying to take the house away from me. You brought brochures about nursing homes. You talked me into moving. You supported Elliot's lies. You may not have known the whole truth, but you knew enough to know you were doing the wrong thing. Raven lowered her eyes, unable to find the words to object. Goodbye, I said, and walked toward the exit. Elliot rushed after me. Dad, stop. You can't just leave. We have to talk this through. Find a solution. I stopped and turned to him. There is a solution, Elliot. You will answer for your crimes before the law. I will live my life without you and Raven. Simple as that. But what happens to us? Elliot sounded desperate. What's going to happen to me? I could go to prison. Is that what you want? I want you to be an honest man, Elliot, I answered. A man who doesn't steal, who doesn't lie, who doesn't betray those closest to him. If you have to go through prison to do that, then so be it. You're a cruel, heartless old man, Elliot shouted, his face contorted with anger. Mom would never do that. She would have supported me, helped me. The mention of Virginia was the last straw. Don't you dare talk about your mother, I said quietly, but with such coldness that Elliot stepped back. Don't you dare use her name to manipulate me. Virginia was an honest, decent woman. She would never have supported what you did. She would have cried tears of shame when she found out what kind of man her son had become. Elliot stared at me with his mouth open, unable to find the words. Raven stood to the side, not interfering. Goodbye, Elliot, I said, and walked toward the courthouse exit. No one tried to stop me this time. It had been 3 months since that day in court. It was a beautiful fall in Healdsburg. The trees were glowing all shades of red and gold. The air was fresh and clear, and the sun was still warm, but without the heat of summer. I sat on the veranda of my house, sipping my morning coffee and watching the light breeze play with the fallen leaves in the garden. The roses that Virginia loved so much had already bloomed, but I had carefully covered the bushes for the winter. Life went on as usual, despite the upheaval. The counterclaim for libel and attempted fraud was settled by the court a month ago. Elliot and Raven were obliged to pay me compensation, $200,000 for moral damages and legal fees. I wasn't interested in the money, but the principle was important. Actions should have consequences. However, getting this compensation was problematic. After that trial, Elliot's life went downhill. The Financial Supervisory Authority turned over the case file to prosecutors, and he was formally charged with fraud, embezzlement, and violations of securities laws. Several investors filed civil suits against him. All of his accounts were frozen and his property seized. Raven filed for divorce a week after the trial. As Jack, my neighbor, informed me, she quickly sold their shared house and left Healdsburg. No one knew where, and few people cared. Raven had no friends or clients left in the small town. The story of the trial and the false report of my incapacity had ruined her reputation. Elliot was left alone, with no money, no support, and the prospect of jail time. He tried to contact me several times, calling, coming to the house, leaving letters in the mailbox. I didn't answer the phone, didn't answer the door, Didn't read the letters. The breakup was final. Sometimes, especially in the evenings, when the house fell into silence, a deep sadness enveloped me. Not about the lost relationship with my son, that pain had dulled into a quiet sadness, but about the dreams and hopes I once had, about the grandchildren I will never see, about family holidays that will no longer be, about the continuation of the Chandler family, which is now in great doubt. But I didn't allow myself to indulge in those thoughts for long. Life was here and now, and it had to be lived honorably no matter what. I took a sip of coffee and looked at the clock. 9:30. Polly Abbott was due in half an hour. Our friendship, which had begun so abruptly after the trial, was one of the few bright spots of these months. Polly came to my house 2 days after the trial. She looked embarrassed and uncertain as she stood on the doorstep with a small bouquet of wildflowers. Mr. Chandler, she said then, I just wanted to make sure you were all right, and to apologize for not contacting financial oversight sooner. Perhaps if I had done so as soon as I noticed Elliot's shenanigans, he wouldn't have gotten this far and caused you so much pain. I invited her in, and we talked for several hours about working at high-tech investments, about how Polly's suspicions were gradually building, about her internal struggle before going to the regulatory authorities, about my relationship with Elliot, about Virginia, about the house where our married life had taken place. After that conversation, we began to see each other regularly. Polly was looking for a new job in Healdsburg, but the small town's financial sector was limited, and her connection to the scandal surrounding high-tech investments didn't make her attractive to potential employers. I offered her help, my old connections in the IRS, and my reputation for knowing how to tell honest people from crooks. 3 weeks later, Polly got a job at a local bank, not as prestigious as an investment company, but stable and with prospects for growth. She was sincerely grateful and insisted on celebrating the event with a dinner that she herself had prepared at my house. Since then, our meetings became a tradition, once a week, usually on Saturday. Sometimes we cooked together, sometimes we ordered food from a restaurant. We talked about everything: work, books, life in Healdsburg, plans for the future. Polly was an intelligent, educated girl with a fine sense of humor and an unexpected depth of thought. In her 32 years, she had already seen and experienced a lot: a failed marriage to a man who turned out to be an alcoholic, the loss of a child in early pregnancy, financial difficulties due to student loans. Our friendship was unusual. After all, 33 years of age difference made a difference. But this difference allowed us to see the world from different angles and enrich each other's views. I shared my wisdom and experience with her. She shared her energy and fresh perspectives on things that I considered established. The ringing of the doorbell brought me out of my reverie. Polly arrived, as usual, exactly at the appointed time. She stood on the doorstep with a small basket that smelled appetizing. Fresh croissants from the new French bakery, she smiled, holding out the basket. They say they're the best around. Come on in, I smiled back. The coffee was ready. We settled on the veranda. The day promised to be warm and sunny, perfect for our plans, a trip to the neighboring town for the fall fair. How was work? I asked, pouring coffee into cups. Better than I expected, Polly replied, taking a bite of her croissant. Mr. Bryant has asked me to head up a new small business project. It's a promotion and a raise. Congratulations, I said sincerely. You deserve it. Thank you, Noam, both for the congratulations and the recommendation. I wouldn't have gotten this job without your help. You got it because of your ability and integrity, I countered. I only helped them to see what they might have missed because of prejudice. Polly smiled and took a sip of coffee. Then her face turned serious. Have you heard the news about Elliot? I tensed up. Polly and I had agreed not to discuss my son unless absolutely necessary. If she broke that rule, then something important had happened. No, I answered. What happened? He pleaded guilty to all charges, Polly said. Deal with the investigation. He got 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 3 years, plus restitution to the investors. I nodded slowly. 5 years. My son will spend 5 years behind bars, or 3 if he behaves himself. It pained me to think about it, but I knew it was the right thing to do. Elliot must answer for his crimes. When he's sent away, I stammered, unable to say the word prison, to a correctional facility, He's already been sent, Polly said quietly. Yesterday, Riverdale County Jail. Riverdale was 200 kilometers from Healdsburg. Close enough for visits, but far enough away that I didn't have to deal with constant reminders. I see, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Well, he'd made his choice. Polly looked at me carefully. Are you all right? Yeah, I tried to smile. It's just weird to realize your son is in jail, even though you knew it was inevitable. She squeezed my hand in silent support. We sat like that for a few minutes, just looking at the garden and the fall sky. You know, I finally said, I'm thinking more and more about selling the house. Polly looked at me in surprise. Really? But you love the house so much. You always said it was your last connection with Virginia. Yes, I nodded. But lately I'm starting to think that my connection to Virginia isn't the walls and roof, but the memories I carry in my heart, and that maybe it's time for a new chapter in my life. What do you mean by that? Polly asked. I'm thinking of moving to another city, a fresh start in a place where no one knows me as the father of that financial fraudster or the old man my son tried to have declared incompetent. Polly nodded thoughtfully. I can understand that desire. Sometimes it's easier to build a new life in a new place. But aren't you in a hurry? It's a big decision after all. I've been thinking about it for weeks, I admitted. Ever since I won the countersuit. It's not an impulsive decision, Polly. It's just that, I think I've been here longer than I should have. After Virginia died, I stayed in this house because it was full of memories of her. But now those memories are mixed with the pain of Elliot's betrayal. I want to keep the memory of Virginia bright, unmarred by recent events. Polly listened to me carefully, then asked, Where are you thinking of moving to? To Sunnyvale, I answered. It's a small town on the coast, about 300 kilometers from here. I'd been there once with Virginia for our wedding anniversary. We both liked the place. Quiet, beautiful, good climate. Perfect for someone my age. Sunnyvale, Polly repeated. Sounds nice. But won't you be lonely there, without friends and acquaintances? Perhaps at first, I admitted. But I've always been able to get along with people. And at my age, it's not the number of friends that matters, but the quality of them. Besides, I'm not going to lose touch with the people I care about here in Healdsburg. I looked at her, and she realized that I was talking about her too. Of course, Polly smiled. 300 kilometers is no distance in this age. Besides, I've always wanted to see the ocean. We finished our coffee and went to the fair. It was a beautiful day, sunny but not hot, with a light breeze bringing the smell of fallen leaves and ripe apples. The fair was noisy and colorful, with many stalls selling everything from homemade jams to handmade jewelry. We wandered between the rows looking at the wares, sampling local specialties, and listening to musicians perform. Polly bought herself a beautiful handmade scarf and a small ceramic owl for her collection. I bought a jar of mountain herb honey and a skillfully carved wooden box, simply because it reminded me of the one I had once given Virginia. After the fair, we had dinner at a cozy restaurant in the main square of the town. The conversation returned to the subject of my possible move. Have you started looking for a house in Sunnyvale yet? Polly asked, cutting into her steak. I'm just looking at the market, I replied. I want to see how much I can get for my house and what I can buy with the money. And what are the prospects? Pretty good, I smiled. Ironically, Raven was right when she said that my house was worth about $700,000 right now. For that kind of money, you could buy a great house in Sunnyvale, smaller than my current one, but with an ocean view. Sounds like fun, Polly nodded. But won't you miss your garden? The roses that Virginia loves so much? I will, I admitted. But I could plant a new garden. Plant new roses. Virginia would understand. Polly nodded thoughtfully, then asked, looking me straight in the eye, What about Elliot? If you move that far away, you'll probably never see each other again. I set aside my fork and knife, gathering my thoughts. You know, Polly, I've been thinking a lot about this. About whether I could ever forgive Elliot, whether I could ever get back in touch with him, and I've come to the conclusion that no, I can't. It's not about his financial fraud, which is terrible. It's the fact that he was ready to declare me crazy, deprive me of my independence, send me to a nursing home, all for the sake of money. I can't forgive that kind of betrayal. Even if he were sincerely remorseful, Polly asked quietly. Repent of what? I smiled sadly. For getting caught? That his plan didn't work? Elliot wasn't remorseful, Polly. He bargained with the prosecution to get the minimum sentence. He shifted the blame onto Raven. He tried to manipulate me using his mother's name. That's not remorse. That's trying to save himself at any cost. Polly nodded without arguing. She had seen Elliot in court, heard his excuses. I understand, she said. It's just that he's still your son, your flesh and blood. Yeah, I agreed. And that's the hardest part. Knowing that your own child is capable of such a betrayal. But Virginia always said, blood kinship is an accident of birth. Real family is those who love and support you, no matter the circumstances. So Elliot may be my flesh and blood, but he stopped being my family the moment he decided to betray me. We finished dinner in thoughtful silence. On the way home, Polly asked, when do you plan to put the house on the market? In the next couple of weeks, I answered. I want to get it done before winter. Houses sell better when the garden looks attractive, even in the fall. Have you found an estate agent yet? I smiled. Yes, Liz Parker from Homeward Bound. She sold the house to our neighbors, the Owenses, 5 years ago, and they were very pleased. Aren't you afraid it'll be hard to sell the house after all this time? Polly asked cautiously. People in small towns love to gossip. Liz doesn't think it's a problem, I replied. First of all, the house is really nice, spacious, with a large lot in excellent condition. Second, Healdsburg is growing, with lots of new people who don't know or have little interest in local stories. Third, after the trial, public sympathy is on my side. No one is judging me for my son's actions. Polly nodded. That's a good thing. And you know, I think you made the right decision. A new place, new people, new experiences. That's what you need right now. Thank you for understanding, I smiled at her. Your support means a lot to me. When we got back to Healdsburg, it was already dark. I drove Polly to her apartment and returned home. The house greeted me with silence and darkness. I turned on the light, put on the kettle, and sat at the kitchen table, looking out of the window at the night garden. A strange feeling swept over me, a mixture of sadness and anticipation. Sadness at the realization that I would soon be leaving this house where most of my life had been spent, and the anticipation of the new phase that lay ahead of me. I pulled a notebook and pen out of my desk drawer. I started making a to-do list before selling the house. I had to sort through things, decide what to take with me, and what to keep or throw away. I needed to check the roof, paint the fence, trim the hedges, all the little jobs that make the house more attractive to buyers. But the most important task was saying goodbye. To say goodbye to the house that had witnessed my life with Virginia, to the garden where I spent so much time, to the neighbors who had become friends over the years, and, most importantly, to say goodbye to the past, the pain of betrayal, the bitterness of disappointment, the weight of loss. Not to forget, no, I will never forget what Elliot did, but to let go. To let that pain become part of history, not the determining factor of the present and future. Sunnyvale was waiting for me. A new home, new acquaintances, new opportunities. At 65, I was beginning a new chapter of my life. Without Virginia, without Elliot, but with the memory of the former and the lessons learned from the latter. I finished my tea and went upstairs to the bedroom, got into bed and, as I did every night, looked at the picture of Virginia on the bedside table. I'm moving soon, Virgie, I whispered, starting over. I think you'd approve. You always said that you can't live in the past, you have to move forward. I'm finally ready to take your advice. I thought she smiled a little brighter than usual from the picture. Perhaps a play of light, or maybe a sign that I'm on the right track.